Aloha, this is Greg from Maui Home Buyers, and today I just wanted to talk a little bit about why you might choose to sell your home to a cash buyer off market versus listing on the MLS with a realtor. So there's a lot of reasons why you might choose to either list or to sell off market to a cash buyer. Most notably, if you don't want to deal with commissions, realtors, repairers, a lot of back and forth, a lot of complicated paperwork. That's one big reason why you might choose to sell directly off market to a cash buyer instead. There's a lot of times when a property might be in really bad condition that is more favorable to selling directly to a cash buyer. In that case, if there's an extensive amount of repairs or problems with the property, and the property is typically not going to be financeable, so you won't be able to sell to a buyer that needs a new mortgage in order to purchase it, that can often lead to your property sitting on the market for a long time. So it depends on the condition of the property. That's one big factor. And your personal goals as far as selling. We often get, and we get a lot of different calls from a lot of people that are preparing to sell their property. And a lot of the times we end up telling them they would be better off just calling a realtor and listing it. A good example of a time when we will almost always refer someone to a realtor is when somebody lives in the home themselves. So they're using it, they're not like covering costs every month. Like the costs that they're paying for the property are their living expenses. The property is in really good condition, just generally doesn't need any repairs, or if it does, they're just minor repairs. Maybe it's a little bit dated, but it's in really good condition overall, and they're not in any kind of hurry to sell. So in that scenario, that person is generally going to be usually better off just listing on the MLS, because it doesn't matter how long it takes to sell. They don't have to worry about their buyer backing out, maybe because they find out, oh, that there's termite damage, for example. A common thing in Maui and all over Hawaii is termites. So that's kind of a scenario where you might want to just list with a realtor. Now, there's also similar scenarios to that. So we did have a purchase kind of during the COVID days. I think it was in 2021, where a family lived in the home. It was a newer home in the Kehelani, Wailuku area, and the home was in great condition. They took really good care of it, but the owner of the home, the dad, who was an engineer for Hawaiian Airlines, had word coming down the pipeline that they were relocating a lot of people, doing a lot of layoffs and things like that. And he didn't want to put his family in a position where if they were, say, transferred over to Oahu, he didn't want to be in a position where they would be stuck paying this mortgage while they waited for it to sell and put themselves in a bad position financially. So in his case, it did make sense for him to sell to us directly. And we were able to come up with an offer that made a lot of sense for him, and we closed really quickly. And we also, they chose to move into a rental where they could just, do month to month. And if they needed to move, they would basically not have to pay any housing for the time where they weren't there. So we helped them find another rental within the same subdivision that, they wanted to stay in the area, and it worked out perfect for them. And they walked away with a pretty comparable amount of cash as to as if they had listed and sold on the MLS. Another scenario is, we recently bought a house actually also in that area, but more towards Waiahu, where the owner had been just struggling financially and wasn't able to keep up with the property. And they actually were living without electricity for, I don't know how long, but I suspect it may have been around 6 months. It was quite some time. And, they had all kinds of like lamps set up and different ways of coping without having electricity. And that was really tough to see. That seller actually had called a realtor and listed his property, but because the condition of the property, and there was a few other people living there that weren't very compliant with the sales process. There was a big dog that was not friendly, and you couldn't approach the dog. The dog would bite. So there was a lot of factors. There was a lot of junk cars, it was borderline. I wouldn't consider it a hoarder house, but there was a lot of stuff in the house. It was hard to walk through. If you did walk through the house, there was fleas embedded into the carpet. So like anytime you would walk through, your legs would be covered with fleas. So that was a scenario where listing with the realtor didn't work. Nobody was, first off, I don't think they even got to do any showings because they couldn't coordinate with everybody. And second off, even if you did get a showing, 99% of buyers are not going to be interested once they saw the extent of the condition of the property. So we were able to work something out with the seller. By that time he found us. He had been waiting for months. I think it had been 3 months that he was with the realtor, and basically, they had one offer for 603. I think it was $603,000. And he found us shortly after, and we were able to buy his house for all cash as is. We hadn't even really seen the whole house. We saw a couple parts of the front of the house and walked around the back, but we basically sight unseen were able to buy it. We paid $625 for the house. This is a smaller workforce housing type of neighborhood, and so we got him more money because if he had sold with the realtor, he would have sold it for 605, I believe the offer was, and he would have paid commissions on top of that. I think around 35 to 40,000 in commissions in that case, in addition to some more closing costs. So in this case, he actually walked away with probably about 50,000, if not more, cash in his pocket. And we were able to close in I think we closed in 12 days on that one, or 14 days. So a matter of days compared to months sitting on the market with no end in sight. So in that case, that was a really good scenario where it made a lot of sense. There's also all kinds of situations where it does make a lot of sense to sell to a cash buyer, like Maui Home Buyers. Another scenario we had was an owner that lived in California, and they owned a home in Maui, and they were planning to come retire in that home. But during a visit, they found another property that they just absolutely fell in love with, and they said, oh, we've got to have this house. They made an offer, and it was bank owned, and the bank told them they would accept their offer, but they had to close within 30 days. So this seller called us and said, listen, we got it. This house was worth 1.2 million, I would say, at the time. And we both agreed on the price. Like that's what it was worth at the time. And they needed to sell for one because they needed the cash in order to close on the new property. But even more so, they wanted to do a 1031 exchange, which would allow them to basically defer the taxes on the capital gains on the house they were selling, because they bought it for like 500,000 and they were, ended up selling for around $1 million. And to them, it made a lot of sense to, they knew that in that case, they were leaving a little bit of money on the table because there was a lot of unknowns, and that also happened to be in March of 2020. So COVID was hitting right when we were going through with the sale. And so there was a lot of uncertainty in the market, but it ended up being a win-win for everybody. They were really happy in the end. And that's another scenario where it worked out really good for everybody. So another one I'll just cover real quick is a rental property we purchased on Maui, where the owner, again, lived on the mainland in Colorado. This was a house in Kihei, and it was in decent condition. It wasn't really bad, but there's parts of the house, had a couple different rental units, and one of the rental units was pretty rough and really needed a lot of TLC. Another issue was there was an African tulip tree, which, if you're familiar with the African tulips here in Maui, they are invasive and they are very problematic. And this tree had grown to be over 100 feet tall. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was a massive tree, and it was ripping up the driveway. The concrete was popping up, I would say, about 2 feet up, so you couldn't drive a car up the driveway. And that tree needed to be removed, and it was also kind of in the back of the property. It was near the cottage, so it was really difficult. Well, not really difficult, but it was complicated logistically to get to the tree. There was another tree that was causing problems. I believe it was like some sort of mango tree, and the mango tree roots were penetrating into the main sewer drain. So that was another problem. The sewer drain was leaking. It was estimated to be about $20,000 to replace the entire drain pipe because it was so long, going from the main house all the way to the sewer tie-in. So there was a few different things going on there that we addressed and were able to help that seller. He was off island, again, living on the mainland. He wasn't able to keep up with the property as much as he wanted. He would come and visit and see it and just be disappointed and frustrated with how the tenants would maintain it. And, but again, living on the mainland, it was really hard for him to keep it in the kind of condition that he wanted to. So in that scenario, there was no rush at all. We had a kind of normal kind of closing. Took 45 days, kind of the standard time frame that we close sales here in Hawaii. And we basically factored in what he would have sold for on the MLS, which was about $950 at the time. We both agreed that that would be kind of the fair open market value. And then we deducted the commissions that he was going to be saving, which was about $45,000, I believe. That was what the realtors were quoting him. And then we also deducted the cost of the removal of the trees, repairing the driveway, repairing the drain pipe, and I think there was a couple other things that basically came out to around another $50,000 or so. So we ended up buying the house for the $950 minus those costs, which was $855 at the time. This is a couple of years ago, so the values have increased a little since then. But that is how we came up with that price. And in that scenario, along with basically all the other ones, they worked out to where the seller was able to walk right away with the same amount of cash they would have gotten if they had listed the house on the market with a realtor on the MLS. But they didn't have to go through all the paperwork, be locked into a contract with a realtor, and have to, be forced to pay them commissions even if the realtor wasn't doing a good job. They didn't have to worry about buyers making offers and then backing out or not getting approved for a new mortgage to pay for the house and all these different kind of things. So it saved them from also having home inspections. And then a lot of times what will happen is a buyer will make an offer or agree on a price with you. So let's say somebody paid agreed to pay $950 for that house. Then they have a home inspection, and then they come back and say, oh, the roof needs to be repaired, oh, the plumbing problems and all this and that. So it's you end up with the same amount at the end of the day, but it's a lot more misleading, I would say. And it can be hard to kind of know how much are you actually going to get at the end of the day. So one of the things I really love about our business is that once we make an offer and we kind of agree on the price, we've already factored in everything. We're really good at, we look at a lot of properties, we go through this a lot, so we can pretty much see most of the stuff. Sometimes we get surprised later and it hurts us because we end up not knowing about something beforehand. But generally we factor all this stuff into the cost beforehand. And once we make that offer, we stick to it. And aside from something catastrophic happening, we don't back out on an agreement that we've decided to purchase. So yeah, that's my favorite thing. And as the seller that, let's say again, in this house in Kihei situation, he knew that the day of closing, he was going to get $855,000. The only cost he had was that we didn't factor closing costs in. So we agreed to do the customary split of closing costs. So he paid around $4,000 or $5,000 in closing costs. And we, of course, helped him understand how much the closing costs would be up front. So he knew the day of closing, he was walking away with $850,000 in cash. No questions, no worries about inspections or how much commissions or how much any other costs are going to be. He didn't have to pay for a home survey. He didn't have to pay for tenting, for termites, or any of those kinds of things. So there's a lot more clarity, and it's a lot more predictable, in my opinion. So again, it's not the right solution for every situation. There's a lot of situations where it can make a lot more sense to go and list on the open market. But there's a lot of situations where it does make a lot of sense, and you can walk away with the same amount of money with much less headaches, much less hassles, and in a much shorter time frame, because from the day you call us, we might, discuss the property and learn about it over a couple days. But once we make an agreement, we'll typically close anywhere between 10 days at the shortest up to about 45, sometimes 60 days, if, depending on your timeline. The sale will be done and over with. And if you were listing with a realtor, you would be spending a couple weeks getting the property ready to list. You'd have to pay for professional pictures to be taken and a lot of marketing to be prepared. And so you'd be on the market live, I would say, usually somewhere between 1 to 4 weeks. So the first month is just getting the house onto the market. Then you'll have anywhere from a few weeks to a few months of being on the market until you find a buyer. And then you'll have the same timeline, somewhere between 30 to 60 days generally for a closing timeline. So listing on the MLS can take anywhere from, I would say at the very shortest would be about 2 to 3 months, but on average, you're probably looking somewhere between 3 to 6 months total from the time you first start the process. Whereas if you're calling a cash buyer like Maui Home Buyers, you can expect to make an agreement with us with a matter of days and then close within, if you need to close in a week or two, we can do that. But generally, most of the people we work with aren't in that much of a rush. So we'll close sometime within about a month or 2 months at the most from when they first contact us. But our goal is just to serve you. So if you need us to close in 10 days, that's about the fastest you can close in Hawaii is about 10 to 12 days. We'll make that happen. If you're not in that much of a rush, then great. We prefer that because then we can do a little bit more research and feel a little bit more confident and how much we're paying and the condition of the property and everything else before we decide to move forward with the sale. So I hope this has been helpful. Thank you for checking us out. And as always, if you're interested in getting an offer on your property, please feel free to reach out to Maui Home Buyers. You can call, text, or email us anytime, 24/7. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much and have a great day. Aloha.